what we do quite often is we say the wrong things and we disenfranchise somebody's right to grieve. We might say things like, well, were you close? Or how old were they? As if that matters. The only loss that matters is their loss.
Do you want to be better with money but dread the math? I get it. That's why this show is not focused on math, the markets, meme stocks, or even economic predictions. It is focused on how money fits into your daily life, from having healthy money conversations to caring for an aging parent. I'm Karen Coyne, certified financial planner professional and your host of Money Without Math. Join us for conversations that are practical, sometimes philosophical, and always fresh. Learn more about me at raymondjames.com/clarity and be sure to subscribe. Have you ever found yourself at a loss for words, trying to comfort someone who is just awash in grief? Or maybe you've been on the other end. You've been on the receiving end of the most well-meaning messages, but maybe they didn't quite land, or worse, they were a little insensitive. Grief and loss are a part of life, and yet we don't really learn the communications around it, or what our guest calls the empathy of etiquette. Well, that ends today. Joining us today is guest Kathi Balasek. As the founder of Grief Ready Communications, she helps financial professionals and organizations build communication skills needed to support clients through loss. She also has deeply personal experience, having become widowed as a young mother while raising 5 children. We'll discuss what it means to be grief literate, why grief isn't just for funerals, how optimism can be hurtful, and the conversation gap that exists between grief and money. Welcome, Kathi.
Thank you so much, Karen. I was looking forward to this all month, so.
Yay!
Yes.
Well, you bring such a warm energy to such a difficult topic, grief and loss, like I mentioned, and it's no secret. I mean, this is something that's very difficult to talk about. So I just feel like you're the perfect person to bring on board because you do just bring such a warmth with you.
Thank you. Thank you. I've lived it, I've learned it, and I was raised from fabulous parents who think that you should pay it forward and play the cards you're dealt and play them well.
So how old were you when you became widowed?
I was 39. My husband was diagnosed with a brain cancer when I was 35, and then he made it almost 5 years more. And then I was 39.
Oh my gosh. And 5 children. I mean, I have 2 boys, and I just think, if anything happened and I were raising them completely on my own, it's hard enough. There's 2 of them, but 5 children, that is a heavy, heavy lift.
It's kind of a blur, and several people say that, but 1, 2, 5, 10 kids, it's all the same. It's all different challenges. And, the more kids I had, the more helpers I had, drivers, all of those things. So, you just move forward.
Right.
Once you're forward in it. That I never planned on.
Right. But once you are there, you just find a way to move forward, right?
Yes. You don't have a choice. They lost one parent. I refuse to let them lose another.
No, you didn't start your career as a grief expert.
No, I did not. I'm a career educator. I was a teacher, and I trained brand new teachers and coaches at the university level. So I've always had a love of communication, engagement, training others how to teach, and the art of that. So I've really kind of tweaked out those skills and put them into my grief literacy training.
Yes, I can see how that transitioned very well. So that's a perfect segue. Tell us, let's just set the groundwork and tell us, what does that mean to be grief literate?
Well, grief literate, there's so many terms out there. This was the closest term that I found of really, it has a piece of really understanding grief in the sense that, it's not in these stages linear, you're going to get through it. I mean, you do need to have a sense of understanding. And we're trained as a society to get through it and get over it, and to understand that grief is a pal that you will walk alongside your whole life. And also understanding that grief isn't just death. And anywhere there's change, there's typically a letting go and a loss, even if it's good change, a new job, a new career, graduating from college. There's still a sense of loss and uncertainty and a lot of the grief signs, which lead you down to some signs and symptoms of grief. And so that's a big piece of grief literacy is, number one, understanding the truths and myths around grief. Number two, becoming grief literate, I would call it grief fluent, is really start practicing the skills of the language. I mean, I would bet every listener, you and I included, how many I'm sorries or sorry for your loss can we count? Because that's almost reflexive, not even reactive anymore. It's just the immediate, quick thing what we say, but we can say so many things that can connect to somebody, help them feel less lonely, less isolated. What we do quite often is we say the wrong things and we disenfranchise somebody's right to grieve. We might say things like, well, were you close? Or how old were they? As if that matters. The only loss that matters is their loss. And becoming fluent in this language is developing a variety of vocabulary where you know exactly what connects, exactly which questions would be safe. You've asked for permission to have the conversation. You've asked about the person's life, not their death. And I think the third most important part of grief literacy is that understanding loss is just not death. It can be a retirement, an end of a career. I mean, who am I if I'm not the CEO of this company or whatever? It can be empty nest. It can be grieving a life you didn't have. It can be divorce, worried about a parent that is experiencing dementia. All of these things are loss, worry, uncertainty. And so you're hitched with grief. And as a society, we don't acknowledge that quite often. And so the person that actually needs our ear and our heart feels pretty isolated.
Yeah, I feel like when you were describing that, what I was thinking about was sometimes it feels like we're in that Nike "just do it." That is our culture, So it's some flavor of we'll get over it, some flavor of maybe it's that hurtful optimism that you alluded to. They're in a better place, which I think a lot of times is well-meaning. People mean well when they say these things.
I completely 100% agree. People want to help. They mean well. But there's some hurdles. They don't want to make it worse with saying something. We go back to what we've heard in the past, and that optimism of they're in a better place, count your blessings, I'm sure you'll find the silver linings. When Brene Brown says it best. Can you sit in the mud with me, please?
Yeah.
And really grieve alongside them. Let them tell you about it. I mean, the reality is I make people uncomfortable. When they actually hear my story or my background, I make people uncomfortable. The widow in the room, it's like the junior high dance with nobody on the floor, because people immediately think, wow, that could happen to me and that could happen to my family. And that, and so that fear is very genuine.
Yeah.
And not wanting to be vulnerable in that time is very real. Not wanting to appear awkward and stumble on words are very true emotions that you shouldn't regret. This is hard. But how often do we run into somebody that says, oh, my mom died last year, or I'm headed to my aunt's funeral, or my friend is going through a divorce. That's a divine invitation. They wouldn't say it if they didn't want you to say something, ask something, tell me about your aunt. What was her name? I'd love to hear about her sometime.
Right. And sit in the mud with them maybe for a minute.
Yes. I mean, we have 2 to 3 minutes on every interaction. And I challenge anybody listening to this to start counting how many times this occurs in our day.
Okay. So you were saying, so when someone makes that comment, instead of, I'm heading to my aunt's funeral this weekend. So instead of, I'm so sorry for your loss, maybe an alternative would be, tell me about your aunt.
Tell me about your aunt. What's her name? Is there something that you enjoy doing with her? Is it okay we talk about this? I'd love to hear about her. But what we usually go to, it was my aunt, people will say, were you close? So do I have to justify the closeness as my gauge?
Right. For how empathetic I feel?
Yes. And there's 3 questions that we should avoid in disenfranchising somebody's loss, because there is no hierarchy of loss. And one is the age of their life, how they died, and the closeness of their relationship. Because, many types of, let's say, for example, deaths, it could be of natural causes. It could be died by suicide. It could be a long-term illness. When grief and sadness is so hard for us, we are little curious buggers, and we want to know why, because it isn't fair, right? It doesn't equal on the balance sheet. And so we just naturally want to know more about the loss when we really should find out more about the life.
Now, if you're on the other end of it, so let's say I've lost someone and the circumstances were I don't want to discuss it. And folks are asking, well, what happened? How did he die? How did she die? How do you respond on that end?
I think creating a clear boundary is really important. You can thank them for their interest, but saying, at this point, I'm not ready to talk about this. And just stop. And I find with any boundary is once you say it once and somebody pushes you again, staying silent is your tool. Because pretty soon they'll understand. Oh, she meant what she said.
Right. And certainly, I mean, it's helpful, when you have these tools, when you already have kind of assembled a toolkit, that you're a little more prepared to answer some of these questions that maybe you don't want to answer, as opposed to being really caught off guard and then, feeling like you're making an awkward situation even more awkward. So that's why I think it's so helpful to have these conversations now, hopefully, while the water's calm and there's not a crisis, because regardless, we're going to all be on, either end of this at some point in time.
Absolutely. I mean, this movie ends. Our movie ends. It's not an if. We might not know when or how, but to start these conversations early and often, and they're conversations, not decisions yet. I'm not talking about blindsiding Nana at the Thanksgiving dinner, okay, just because you're all there. I mean, these are conversations planned and prepared with family members who matter to you and you want to protect. And it's really interesting with family of planting seeds. My son, he asked me one time, we've talked about this with all my kids because they know this matters to me and they know what I do now. But I told him my favorite song was John Denver's Sunshine on My Shoulders. And he's like, oh, good Lord, Mother, I've never heard it. And anyway, I said, well, I really want that played at my service when I die. And I knew he'd had enough at that point. He didn't want to talk about that. But I planted that seed. And a couple days later, I came home from work and he was at the piano. And guess what song he was playing?
Oh.
So these things, these little planted seeds to your kids, to your parents, to your siblings of what matters, they need to start now, just like you said, in calm waters. Because, we met in a sense of, you're an advisor, I help advisors. We talk about those gaps between grief and money because wherever there is loss, money accompanies it.
Yes. And I do want to talk about that. But I'm curious. Okay. So what was your husband's name?
John.
Now, had you and John ever had any of these conversations?
Yes.
Music, the music was just what reminded me of that.
Yes, we did. And, we had a heads up. To be fair, we were in our 30s and had kids, careers. We had some of these conversations. But when you're in mid-30, you don't think that way, right?
Right.
But then when he got diagnosed with brain cancer, we had a heads up, like, holy cow, we got to get these conversations going. And so it was sort of baptism by fire right then. And looking back, I wish we would have had him sooner.
Right.
I mean, if you are getting married or if you are responsible for another person, you have to have these conversations. You need to have life insurance. You need to have somebody that you can go to for long-term finances, because I had to learn the hard way and I didn't have a huge understanding of all those decisions. And when there's loss and you have to have those conversations, and specifically money conversations, the money represents my ultimate cost, which was his life. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about cancer and life insurance and pension plans. And I wish we'd have done it before.
Before there was a diagnosis?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yes.
Right. This is the thing, right? A lot of times we know we should, there's that get around to it. I remember someone used to have like an actual, it was like a token and it was round and it said to it. So it was around to it, will you ever get around to it? Because there are so many things and we know that we should, but we just don't get around to it. And this is one of those things, the entire span of the conversation from, who would what song would you want me to play at your celebration of life? Or would where would you want to be buried? Or do you even want to be buried? To, all the other aspects that you mentioned, like the financial, the life insurance. the estate planning, who's going to take care of our kids if something happens to both of us. I mean, I had a similar experience in watching my mom go through it, becoming a widow when I was 15, and my dad died at the age of 40, unexpectedly, no heads up, in a car accident. And even then, back then, like many years ago, and I've said so many times, we didn't have Google. But even if we did, I could have Googled endlessly. I would have gathered information, but that's not the same as giving my mom advice. That's very different. That's information. That's not advice. That's not me helping her make decisions, and she had to make so many decisions at a time when you can't even remember where your car keys are or get out of bed. It's the absolute worst time to make financial decisions. So anyone who is listening, who is in calm waters, I just, let this be your message today, coming from, two women who've lived it, that you want to have these conversations before you have to have them, when you can have them on your own terms and when you have the energy to do it. Because when that day comes, you don't have the energy.
No, you don't. And, thank you for sharing about your dad. What's his name?
His name was Edward. He went by Larry.
Larry. Okay. And I'm sure losing your dad and watching your mom go through this has influenced you and influenced conversations you have. And when you look back at what we talked about of being grief literate, it's not always about death. And if you're having normal conversations with people about, divorce, a health problem, menopause, infertility in a young couple, all of these things, losing a job, being laid off, losing a house, it's all loss. And we start to get more comfortable with talking about it.
Yes.
And then in the heavy hitters, the widowhood, deaths, caregiving, we're not brand new at it.
Yeah. And, even when you were sharing your avoids, which I know I've done every single one of these. And I mean, one of my first questions to you today was, how old were you? Well, I wasn't how old was John, but how old were you?
Well, yes.
But I think in my experience, the difference is that I feel I'm more comfortable sitting in it. I can sit in it. I might not always have the perfect words, but I am comfortable sitting in it. Whereas a lot of people, they just don't even want to touch down. They just want to avoid. Don't let those feet hit that mud. They don't want to go there. And it wasn't that long ago. I was at a dinner maybe of some of my peers, some fellow advisors, I believe. And let's say there were like 5 of us, and 3 of us at the table had all lost a parent around the age of 12 to 15. And I just thought that was so stunning that, let's say it was roughly that. It was, definitely a disproportionate number of us sitting at the table that had this common experience.
It's so true. And I think one of the big things that I've noticed in my life and in my work and meeting more people is that, really practicing presence and being conscious of presence when you are talking to somebody who has told you about a loss. It's an art, it's a skill, it's a practice, it's a mindset. And there's some things that you can do to keep on coming back. It's about them. Your body language, your eye contact, those are key things that make this space tender. And even if you do a total foul with words and all of that, you still are silent, present, and engaged. It's really all people want. Because I think one of the real misses in our culture, and it's causing a very chronic problem of loneliness, is we don't welcome these stories. Larry will always be your dad. He is your dad. It's not was, he is. It's a story. Let's talk about Larry. I was at a wedding this summer. My son got married, and everybody was sharing engagement, how you got engaged. Well, I'm thinking, I'm going to be the biggest buzzkill at the table because mine is sad. They know my story ended sad. But you know what? Somebody asked me, and they wanted to hear it. And I got to tell my engagement story.
Oh.
Even though John died, those memories are still alive. And I don't think we allow other people to tell the stories of their life.
Yeah. So that's so powerful. I mean, and what I'm hearing and sensing is that, even if the words perfectly don't flow, even if you feel like, oh gosh, I've made every single one of these faux pas, you know what? If you're showing up and you're present and you're interested in the person and you're looking at the life and not just not trying to avoid it, not making it, any more uncomfortable than it already is, but just by being present and by really sitting in it and not trying to avoid that goes a long way.
It really does. And to not, forget what we said in the past. We are all imperfect. And today we can get it better because we are culturally conditioned to cheer people up. That's just how we are. You're so strong. You're so resilient. That's just in our language. And so,
Kathi, just be strong.
Yes.
How many times did you hear that? Be strong, Kathi.
Yes. And I can appreciate that people are there to help and to support. There's just a better way to do it. Let's modernize this approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it'll improve your relationships. It'll improve your life. I mean, this is the biggest 2-for-1, buy one, get one deal. Because when you can be empathetic and hold presence with somebody else, it is joy-giving.
Now, but so to touch on, to go back to what you were saying about the optimism, what ends up happening is when people, again, are well-meaning, but with this focus on optimism, it ends up kind of alienating, right?
Yes. When we try to be optimistic and, silver linings, look on the bright side, we say things like, well, you should do this and you should do that and you should be thankful. And at least they lived a long life. And we're trying to cheer. And, counting your blessings is an inside job. I don't think it's at somebody else's position to tell another to count their blessings. Because there's been some beautiful things that have come out of my life after John died. But are they blessings? I'm able to see some things, but what I really want is him back. So anything cheering me up and rationalizing it or justifying it, it's a kind of a icky it's kind of I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's kind of like a consolation prize.
Yeah.
And so, but again, it goes back to that whole thing. Humans generally want to help. Right. We want to take your pain away. We see you hurting. Our heart is broken for you. And so we go to the default terms that we've heard in the past. And if you could do 4 things, you could acknowledge their loss as significant, no matter what loss it is. You could say the person's name. You could ask them, what difference did they make in your life? What you will miss, or tell me about them. And then you thank them for allowing you a piece of their life. That just can go over and over and over, because what it does, it continues the conversation. It deepens the relationship and trust very quickly, because in loss, you know who shows up and you know who doesn't. And those things matter.
So acknowledge the loss is significant, say their name, Ask them how they made a difference in their life. Tell me about them, and then thank them.
Yes. Yes. I mean, and you could just do that over and over and over, no matter if it was a divorce, you can say, somebody says, well, my good friend is getting divorced. Acknowledge that as significant. Tell me your friend's name. Tell me, what are some things that I could help listen to, or how you're supporting her. They want to tell you.
Right.
Or they wouldn't mention it. And so
Right.
you are the good friend that are just letting this conversation unfold. And I'm telling you, the trust it builds in a very quick 2 or 3 minutes is phenomenal.
I believe you. I absolutely believe you. And especially because it's so uncommon that someone does lean in. And
yes. And it's, you can't outsource empathy.
yeah.
And you can't AI it. None of this. And it looks messy and beautiful all at once when you show up, which that's what we're about in this world.
Right. Yes. I'm a big fan of be real. And the reality is that it's messy out there. I did want to circle back to what you call the conversation gap between grief and money. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I often tell people that widowhood is financial. I experienced that type of loss, but whether it's, widowhood, caregiving, divorce, all of these conversations, when to take Social Security, long-term finances, everything has a money component. And even now, it's been 20 years since John's death. There are still financial decisions that I have to continue to make based on experiencing widowhood in my 30s. And having an advocate who understands the financial piece, I study a lot of the data around this. And when 90% of women will at one time in their life be the sole financial decision maker, let's learn about money. I have regrets. I wish I would have known more. I handled the household budget and all of that, but I didn't understand the long-term choices, and I was not involved all the time equally. And it's just, I retired from my university position and I had a career change. That all was money. Choosing to marry or not marry when you're a widow, if you choose before you're 60, you're not eligible for those benefits. There's a lot of financial components of decisions, housing decisions with your parents, downsizing. These conversations have money associated with it. And money conversations are very vulnerable. And so is loss. And so you've got two challenges right in front of you. And so many young couples, this should be a date night conversation. When this happens, if one of you lost your job, if we had a miscarriage, if we didn't want children, if we, whatever. Because again, it's not if. These things will happen in your life, and it's so much better to have a rapport and a relationship with the people you care about and be on the same page in calm waters. Because I've made a ton of financial mistakes because I had no clue. I went out and bought a car for the first time on my very own, paid too much, got the extended warranty. They told me the color of the car was cashmere, and I said sold. I didn't even think about payments,
the interest rate, or
insurance.
Right.
And if you're gonna be on your own sometime or suddenly solo, or you choose to be solo, a lot of these decisions, you don't have somebody to bounce those off.
Right.
And you need somebody in your corner that you can communicate with in life's worst moments.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've said many times hiring a financial advisor is like really almost like hiring a family member. We're often one of the first phone calls, one of the firsts when there's a birth, a death, a major life change, divorce, disability, job loss. Because to your point, all these life transitions are closely associated with financial ramifications. And so the sooner that you can wrap your arms around it, even if you are not the point person, but just showing up in those meetings, getting those reps in on those conversations, just starting to build a general awareness. So again, you're not starting from scratch during the worst days of your life. You don't want that. I don't want that for anyone. And I know you don't want that. And generally there is one partner who's more actively involved with the financial planning. And that's okay to have one be the point person, but we want both of you showing up and engaging in those calls and meetings and conversations. And like you suggested, a great place would be on, plan a date night and make it an agenda. And I always say, if you don't know where to start the conversation, I think a great kind of hack is give yourself as a unit, you have a homework assignment, and it could be a shared, a podcast episode like this that you both listen to, and then you talk about it. And so now you have this shared reference point that you can say, hey, what did you think of that conversation that Karen and Kathi had about, grief and loss, and what would you want? And I was thinking this, and what do you think about that?
It's so vital. I had a really just heartwarming story about a year ago of my niece. They were young, they're in their 20s, they're married. And she took my advice and had a couple date nights. And she said, we talked about life insurance and we cried, but we talked it out. And now they're closer. They feel more secure. They've really started to look deeper into what they want in their future, how their money can work with them, what future conversations. I mean, it's not an all or nothing, just little planting seeds bit by bit. And it just really deepens a relationship and understanding. And, that's love. We talk about difficult things with the people we love.
Well, Kathi, you've already shared so much today. Just, I think, if anyone is listening and maybe they're feeling like, yeah, it's something I need to do, take this as your cue to have these conversations with the people that you love. Kathi, any last closing thoughts before we wrap?
I just want to sincerely thank you for having me on. And overall, I just feel like we are on this earth for a breath. Find one person today that you could share and listen to what they're going through.
Well said. Beautiful. Well, thanks again for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
This was lovely. Any opinions expressed by Kathi Balasek are not necessarily those of Raymond James. Raymond James is not affiliated with nor endorses Kathi Balasek or Grief Ready Communications. This podcast is for informational purposes only.